Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we've got a great show today because we're going to be talking about bereaved dads and the life that they had and trying to deal with it and being in support groups. And I call it making the most of Mr. Mom, because we know from other men that we've interviewed, one of their deals is talking about that they have to get in touch with their soft side.
His name is Dr. Justin Yopp, and he is a clinical psychologist and Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of North Carolina. He co-leads the Widowed Parent Program at University of North Carolina, and he is a co-author of the book, The Group, 7 Widowed Fathers Reimagining Life. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on with you guys.
It's great to be on with you. Oh, and I forgot to say, one of our new sponsors of the show is Soaring Spirits Foundation, Michelle Fernandez's group. And so we are welcoming them, co-sponsoring the show with us.
They're a great group. They've been, spoke at their conference, 2 or 3 years ago. She and their group especially have been doing a lot of great work with a lot of young widows and widowers.
You started a men's bereavement group and got excited about writing this book, right?
Yeah, it really came about organically. I actually am a psychologist at a cancer hospital here at University of North Carolina, and it so happened that we had, about 8 years ago now, it so happened that we had several young mothers who all unfortunately passed around the same time, and our team started thinking about their husbands who we had gotten to know a little bit while working with their wives, and tried to refer them to a support group for widowed fathers that we naively thought would be easy to find, and we pretty quickly learned that there's just not a whole lot out there specifically for widowed parents, especially widowed fathers. And so we decided to start a support group then and there, and that was, like I said, 8 years ago, and we've been kind of going strong ever since, and have from that first group of men built a program now where we have a website where we do conduct research, we're publishing papers, and as you mentioned, my colleague Don Rosenstein and I wrote a book published earlier this year by Oxford Press about the 7 men in that first support group, and the book weaves in contemporary thoughts on grief and adaptation and post-traumatic growth and resiliency in with the story of these 7 guys and kind of tells their story over a 3 or 4 year period. So the men have been amazing partners through all this, and they encouraged us to write this book and use their real name and real stories. And so we did that. So yeah, we have the book out. We've been really heartened with some of the feedback that we've gotten, because there's not a whole lot out there specifically for widowed parents, and to hear that this is resonating with those folks really means a lot.
That's neat. You know, I was looking at some of your work and I was talking to Heidi about it, and I said, one of the things that I think's interesting is you talk about dating pretty early on. And that's interesting because I don't know what your take on it has been, but it seems to me that for women, their biggest problem early on is not about dating. It's about how to make money, how to take care of their kids, how to do some of those male things that for most women, their routine is really shot in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I would say for men that dating was not the first, second, or third thought for any of them. It was, we kind of say that on day one, if you have children in the home, day one after losing your spouse, you're faced with your own grief, all that entails. You're faced with shepherding your children through their own grief, and then figuring out how to run a household by yourself and be an only parent.
And that's big.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of each, any one of those things is huge.
Yeah.
And to have all the confluence of those 3 things come at once, and those are very broad buckets with a lot that goes into each of those. And then eventually, a lot of the men that we've worked with and the women, we have a mothers group now, have started to, of course, think about moving forward in their own lives in different ways. And part of that is dating, which is its own.
Well, has it been your observation that men are more quickly connecting up than women are, or not, as far as remarriage and all that kind of thing, or not?
Yeah, so just our observation, we don't have any of our own data on this, but our observation is that, really it kind of varies. We have, seems like some fathers that we've worked with who have very young children are maybe a little more inclined to remarry or to be, to kind of, begin a relationship. And it seems like some of the men who have older teenagers, say, are a little less inclined. And that's like I said, that's just kind of an observation. It's not, there's no data behind that we know of. But our thought of that is that if you only have, it's a lot to introduce a new mother figure, and a lot to have to start finding the time and the energy and the will to start dating again. And, if your kids are a couple years from being out of the house, then, kind of the thought of, well, I'll just kind of hold off until maybe they're out and make that a little easier. That makes sense. But if your kids are 3, 4, or 5, the idea of waiting 13 to 15 years might seem a little more daunting. And that's a really simplistic way of looking at it.
I would think it would be easier, and I'm stereotyping here, to introduce young kids to somebody new than teenagers.
Yeah, I think that probably is true. And, teenage years can be tough for a lot of reasons. And we've certainly heard our fair share of stories from mothers and fathers, dating again and what that means to their children. And certainly adolescents can protest, and
they can log in for sure.
Yeah, and it's, certainly dating again and what that means is just it's really hard and really complex. And at a time when you're already mentally and emotionally and maybe even financially taxed from everything you've been through, starting to date again, I think is a need and a desire that men have before they start acting on it, at least in situations that we've observed.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you also about in-laws. People talk about that. That seems to, when we talk to grandparents and people like that, it seems to be a big issue with how to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first question is, are they still in-laws?
I like that question.
Do you call them in-laws? Do you maybe call them something else? But absolutely. I think a lot of that probably depends on a few things. One, what kind of relationship you had with your in-laws beforehand, perhaps how close they are to you, proximity-wise, and then maybe kind of how involved that they're going to be. So, yeah, it's tough. I think everyone that we've worked with certainly understands and appreciates and wants for their children to have a relationship with their wives' parents. And sometimes that makes it trickier than other times. And I think that really varies individually. But, do we talk about in-laws and kind of what their role may be in the father's lives and certainly in the children's lives? That's not an infrequent topic of discussion in our group meetings.
Right. Now, you, some of these families, or all of them, you saw them with the wife having cancer, and then you were able to follow them or not?
Only some. So our group, for the mother's group now that we have in the father's group that we've been running for a while now, their wives or husbands or spouses or partners don't have to have been treated here at UNC. We kind of take anyone. So it's probably about half and half of families that we have worked with and then refer them to the group and they join, compared to ones who just hear about it or, hear about it in other ways and join the group. So it's not an automatic extension or an exclusive one just from who we see here.
I would imagine that the group, Justin, is not only a group of support, but a group of men giving other men advice. For example, how do I deal with this with my daughter? Or how do I cook this? Or how do I, just basic living things that maybe their spouse did and now she's no longer there.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So there's a big support part that you mentioned, but then there's also the advice. And sometimes the fathers have, great advice for each other. Sometimes they have, here's what I did that did work. Here's what I did that hasn't worked.
Yeah.
And, sometimes hearing that kind of advice from someone who's in your position can mean a lot, as opposed to coming from a friend or a coworker or a family member who may not at least you may feel would not completely understand what you're going through. So yes, some of the advice is great. And sometimes the fathers don't have advice for each other based on situation. And sometimes even that's reassuring, right? Like there's not any great advice. There's no great solution to this. There's no kind of easy, bow to put on this. It's just a struggle. And sometimes sitting with and tolerating that struggle is, as far as we see it, is part of the adaptation process.
Yeah. So you have some people who have had a long-term illness and some who have died suddenly. Do you see any difference in the coping, or?
You know what? So in our experience, just with the support groups, what we see is that there's probably there's probably more of a difference in the early phases, whether or not you've been able to anticipate this death or whether or not it's a sudden death. I think has a bigger impact on that initial coping and understanding and making sense. But really, as time goes on, the challenges of being a widowed parent seem to be largely similar. The one carve out to that, I would say, is that if you are a widowed parent due to suicide, that may be in a little bit of a category of its own, or at least have some unique challenges. But as opposed to, or as whether someone died from cancer or someone died in a motor vehicle accident, our sense is that as far as being a widowed parent, the differences between those two pretty much evens out the longer you get away from the point of death. Mm-hmm. But that's also something that we're looking at with our research studies. So we have on our website now, we have a survey link where parents can, if they choose to, can fill out a survey. And so far we've had, I think, 460 people fill it out, and we're still collecting new data. So that's actually a question that we're looking to shine more light on.
What is the difference between being a woman that's a widow, and a man? Have you seen differences in what they're struggling with?
That's a great question. One, again, I hope we can answer with some data, but I think we don't have a great answer to that, because we don't, Don and I, we lead the fathers group, but we have two of our colleagues who lead the mothers group. And so we're just now starting to meet to kind of discuss back and forth. What are you guys seeing compared to what we're seeing? Yeah. And it seems, I think one kind of thing that we identified in our first meeting, which was just last week, was that for widowed fathers, there seems to be a lot of people in society, a lot of neighbors, friends, family, kind of feel almost more sorry for them, and maybe at least the fathers kind of see it as others questioning whether or not they can do the whole single parent thing. And
and I'm wondering if the in-laws too might come in with some advice that might be appreciated and some that is not appreciated.
Again, I think that probably depends on the previous relationship that you had with your in-laws.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How receptive you are to new advice, and then how that advice is offered. And I think at the beginning there's certainly these parents tell us that they just feel overwhelmed and they're just over their head. So in some ways there's a little bit of a kind of, anyone who can help us, I'll take it. But over time, I think what happens is that these parents start to feel a need or a desire to want to do it on their own a little bit, and not be so reliant upon others. And we've had a couple of cases where that seems to be a friction point, where the fathers have wanted to be a little more kind of make sure they can do this on their own and get a little bit less help. And that can feel like pushing aside to in-laws or to friends or others.
Yeah, you want to feel confident at some point. And this is a good segue, because before we finish the show, I want to talk to you about post-traumatic growth. Yeah.
So we have a whole chapter in the book about it. And it's not something, that's a construct that's been around for, I think, 25 years by Tedeschi and Calhoun, a couple of guys in North Carolina as well, in Charlotte. And we
actually had him on our show.
Oh, did you? Yeah. They're certainly pioneers in this work. Yeah. And that's not something that we hear a whole lot when men first join the group, but it's something that we hear more and more. And the way that our group works now, the way that we do it, is that we have kind of a rotating open door membership where new members can join. I mean, we have it more structured than I'm making it sound like now, but it creates a kind of a veteran father, new father dynamic. And so some of the new fathers can come in, and we've had a few situations where new fathers have heard early on in their joining the group, heard from more veteran fathers, instances of where they've grown closer to their children, or where they feel more involved as parents, or even more competent in as parents over time. And that actually gives the new people hope, right? Like, because at the very beginning, it feels overwhelming, and the idea that you may grow or benefit, or that this may have any silver lining can sound tone deaf. But when you hear it from someone who's been in your shoes, it doesn't sound tone deaf. It sounds encouraging, and it sounds like a light that you can hope to reach yourself one day.
I love that. Okay, so I want you to tell people, if they want, I'll say what I would think, how to get into your study.
Yeah. So
and where to get your book. So start out with your study.
Yeah. So the study is we have a website. It's www.widowedparent.org, and the site serves two purposes. One is just a resource and a support for widowed parents anywhere. We have a series of videos featuring some people who have been in our group. We have a whole kind of list of specific resources and links. We did a 13, 14-minute video that parents may find interesting. So in an internet that has anything you can imagine, it's the only thing, at least that we know of, that's specific for widowed parents. And on that site, there is a link if parents choose to. They don't have to, but if they want to fill out about a 20-minute survey that's really going to help us learn more about the widowed parent experience, and then in turn, how to provide services that are more tailored to widowed parents. And then the book is called The Group, 7 Widowed Fathers Reimagine Life. And it's not a book specifically for widowed parents per se. It's a book for anyone who's looking to learn and cope with adversity, especially grieving a loss. It's not a how-to book. It's really more of a how they did book, talking about the 7 men who were in the first support group. And then with their stories, we weave in contemporary thoughts on things like post-traumatic growth and resiliency to kind of bring to life those concepts through the story of these 7 men who we've become big fans of. And all proceeds from the book go back to the program. Don and I are not much for capitalism, apparently, because
the first time I ever saw the book was in Dr. Donna Sherman's hands.
Oh, well, it doesn't get much. It doesn't get a whole lot better than that.
It doesn't. She was the executive director for the Dougie Center. For those of you that don't know this, for over 25 years, and serves on the board of the Compassionate Friends with me today. She was walking around reading it, and she said to me, "Heidi, you've got to have these guys on. This book is fabulous."
Well,
hey, Donna, you're giving it the stamp of approval. So
again, getting the stamp of approval from Donna Sherman, that's about as good as it gets. And we've actually been really fortunate. The books we've been on, the Today Show, NPR, Time Magazine, People Magazine of all places.
Wow.
So we've been fortunate. So we're happy to tell these guys' stories in a way that hopefully will help others.
Great. And I'm sure you can get it on Amazon as well.
Amazon, it's in a lot of Barnes and Nobles, and hopefully some independent bookstores, but I'm not sure about that.
Well, hey, thank you so much for being on our show today. We're very honored.
I really appreciate the invitation, and really appreciate all the great work that you guys continue to do.
Thank you. And I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation in partnership with the Soaring Spirits Foundation. And Heidi and I always want to tell everyone, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.